Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. Today's topic is anger, and it seems like quite a timely topic given where we are in the world at the moment. There is a lot of anger and resentment pervading the world. And in many ways, it provides an excellent opportunity for us to explore anger through the real-life experience of lockdown and restrictions. So what we'll cover in this session is exploring the real-life experience of what it's like to be locked down and restricted. We'll also brainstorm personal reasons for anger to arise during lockdown. Then we'll look at what we do when we get angry. So this is the initial part of setting the scene for how we get to where we get to with anger. And then we'll launch into the Buddhist teaching. So we'll look at the grounds for anger through the Āghātavatthu Sutta. And then we'll start deconstructing these grounds for anger and resentment. And then we'll also apply the Āghātavatthu Sutta to deconstruct mental defilements. Anger is one of these mental defilements. And then we'll look at how this leads to giving up anger and resentment. What the world is currently experiencing with a variety of different lockdowns and restrictions provides a very good opportunity for us to look at this real life situation to explore anger. As we know from the Buddhist teachings, anger is actually arising from the root of hatred, from dosa, hatred. And it comes in many, many different guises. So it comes as ill will, it comes as anger, it comes as resentment, it escalates to hostility, rage, and all kinds of permutations. And oftentimes it's very hard for us to penetrate anger. It arises and it seems to never cease. You know, we find it so difficult to abandon anger, let alone examine it properly. So today we're going to take the real life situation of these lockdowns and restrictions, and it's occurring to varying degrees. At different times it gets more serious across the world, and different times it alleviates. But I think all of us can understand different parts to the current situation, or we've experienced it in the past. And so using this example, it's a very good way of peeling away some of the layers to actually get to see how do we construct anger and how can we not construct anger. In many ways, deconstruct anger. And so this is like peeling away the first layer of anger. And the Buddha has a number of teachings that help us to do that. But there's more than just this first layer of anger, and that's why this particular talk is titled Anger 1.0. The Buddha has stronger medicine that can be applied, and we may look at that at a later time. So in this first instance, we're going to look at this real life situation of lockdowns and restrictions to see where we justify our anger, feel quite righteous or self-righteous in our anger, and then look at what the Buddha says about that. When we look at this present situation that's been occurring for the past almost year and a half, many of us have been locked down at one time or another. Some of us are still under lockdown. So that means there are travel restrictions, there are restrictions around what you can and can't do in terms of when you do go out. There are restrictions on who and when we can see certain people, whether they're young or old. There's restrictions about whether we're allowed to go to school, to work, to do social activities. There are restrictions on all forms of entertainment. And as a result of that, there is a lot of hardship around employment, financial matters, a deep stress on relationships, deep sadness and sorrow around loss. And as a result of all of that, and much, much more, there are all these reasons that arise for anger. And they seem very, very real. And of course, at that moment, they are very, very real when anger arises. And the other thing to remember is that when we veer towards things like sadness, sorrow, lamentation, all of that is also coming from anger. Because underneath or within those emotions, those feelings, is actually something that is quite resentful, quite angry. And it's important to investigate it and recognize it also as anger. When people pass away, there's this understanding that there are different stages of grieving. And one of them is actually around anger. So that's also another way of being able to understand that sadness, sorrow, lamentation, grief, despair, there is anger contained within those things as well. So during this time period, many of us have suffered loss of lives, loss of loved ones. So that also means that there is an arising of anger there. And many of us have lost, freedoms, being able to do what we like, doing what we want. There's been a huge loss of freedom. And so in that way, that's another very good way of looking at how we can understand how anger arises. But on this slide, there's a list, and it's not a comprehensive or exhaustive list. This list can go on and on and on. But these are some of the personal reasons for anger to arise during lockdown. Many of us don't get angry for the same things. And we also have different degrees of being able to bear with certain conditions, certain conditions that come into our lives. And we also have different punya, that means different merit. So some of us are born into families that may have, more wealth, more influence, while others are born into different families that have less of all those things. And so with these varying conditions based on our previous karma, our previous punya, then it also determines how we fare in terms of, this current life, this current existence. So for that reason, we have varying, reasons for anger. But if you go down this list, it has particular people or sets of people. So you start with politicians, government, the police, armed forces. Sometimes you go into elites, the rulers of the world. Then you get into large organizations such as the UN, the United Nations, global powers. Then you go country by country. Specific countries are the ones that are causing, the situation, and therefore they're harming me. Then you get angry with mainstream media, what they're spouting out, or maybe it's alternative media, what they're spouting out. Some of us may get angry at medical professionals, all kinds of medical professionals, not just doctors, but it could be nurses, it could be health inspectors, it could be scientists, academics. Then there's big pharma. Sometimes we see that, there's so much money being made and blah, blah, blah. Then, there's science. Some of us get very angry about the science because, the narrative at the moment, we must believe the science. And so some of us may get very angry with that. Others may not, but there may be a subset that gets very angry about the science. And then there's the education system. Then we get angry at a more personal level, because of living situations. We get angry with our partner, different family members, different friends. Usually this happens because of their views. You may have differing views about the current situation. And then our colleagues, it could be climate issues, it could be our neighbors. And then it gets into other things that, you think it's not on your radar as the reason for anger, but there's things like animals or our pets, celebrities. Conspiracy theories is a huge one at the moment. The number of conspiracy theories that people get bogged down in is mind-boggling. then, you have divine powers. So you think it's the devil, you think it's the God, you think it's a number of different gods, depending on what you believe in. Then what comes through is political beliefs, religious beliefs, even aliens. One of the largest conspiracy theories at the moment is around aliens. So things like that. Then when you come back into Buddhism, there's things like departed relatives are causing certain things. Then there are, different vices such as addictions, prone to aggression, domestic violence, unemployment, financial issues, health issues, mental illness. And then other things that are also quite talked about at the moment: racism, sexism, gender bias, ageism. And then all the things that are specific to lockdowns and restrictions, particular to the rules and regulations at the moment about, social distancing, mask wearing, the rule breakers. And there's so much more. But you can see, just by going down this list, how many people already feel some form of anger arising just by placing your mind in this real life situation. And there's bound to be at least one thing on this list, if not many more, that you can accept. This makes me angry, and this even I'm justified in this anger. And so let's look at this as a way of understanding and exploring anger. So this talk is not to make our anger deepen. It's actually using it in a wholesome way, in a constructive way, so that we start to understand the arising of anger, and to actually use it in order to break through how we actually almost like remain in anger, glorify anger in some ways, and then increase anger rather than reducing it, rather than deconstructing it. So let's look a little deeper into anger and resentment from just the usual way of looking at it. So when we went through the list of reasons for blame, what you see on that list is actually people and things that we blame. And so a lot of it is around playing this so-called blame game. So when anger arises and you want to tell someone about it, the main thing that comes up is, oh, it's because of this person. It's because of this reason. And so a lot of the time it's really good to admit that we're playing the blame game, right? Because this is something that we have been conditioned to do. So when we're young, we see, people arguing, see people get angry, usually the adults. And what we see is finger pointing, pointing blame. And so what do? We adopt the same tendency. And so as adults and even young people right now, what we're doing is playing the blame game. And it's not to say that that's not real, that's not true, but what is very true is this game that we play. And that's the first thing to admit, to accept, to look at. And then the second thing is, where it comes from is wanting to feel justified, that we are righteously in the right. And that's where a lot of this comes from. We enjoy feeling right about our anger. And it's our anger. This is part of me. And so when we talk about anger, it's always my anger versus your anger. And, I'm in the right. And so when we start to hear ourselves talk in this way, and a lot of the time it's self-talk, and then when we actually verbalize it to other people, we're really doing this third thing, which is seeking support from others. So we're looking for reinforcements, people to join our army, people to join our cause, because anger then becomes a cause. And usually, like you see on social media, you see on the internet, all these tribes coming together. Let's join together and get through this. Let's join together in our anger to be this particular group. And so you see these groups forming on social media, on the internet, and in not so much, in real life because of the restrictions, but you still see that too. People coming together to protest, people coming together to talk about the issues, but really they're talking about anger. And what's really important to understand about it is that the more you do it, the more the anger never subsides. And so this is not about judging whether where people are coming from in these groups is right or wrong, because that goes into the whole, you can go into the whole whole of that and never come out of it. If you say, okay, this conspiracy is right, this theory is right and this is wrong, you never come to the end of that. And so this talk is not about that. Buddha doesn't advise us to look at it from that perspective. But what we're doing is discerning the qualities, the ways that we can get embedded and stuck in anger, and even increase anger rather than deconstruct, get out of, even abandon anger and resentment. And so when we seek support from others, Buddha would call this a very asapurisa quality. So this is not the quality of what the Buddha defines as a good person, it's the quality of a bad person. And as we remember, bad goes with bad, good goes with good. These are the elements that bring us together. And so by calling this out, it's really saying, look at it. Look at it for what it is. That if you are on the spiritual path and you want to be a better person, you want to actually be on the side of peace, calm, happiness, true happiness, then these are not things that you want to do. And so what we're trying to do is just expose how we go the wrong way rather than the right way. And we don't even know that we're doing it. It becomes an unconscious thing because it seems so justified, it seems so real. And we don't believe that we are justifying anger. We think we are working towards a good cause. And there might be elements that are relatively true about that. But it's really important to see it for what it is. And so the other side of seeking support from others is that we are drawing other people into unwholesome things. So people that may actually be sitting on the side of wholesome or just sitting on the fence. And when you compel them into your cause, into your justification, and they decide to come with you, then you're actually doing something quite unwholesome. Now, if you're joining a group that already exists, well, you're just joining another group that is of the same element. And you're really, seeking reinforcements for your justification. And then the fourth thing is that we feel that we're alive in many ways, sometimes in anger, that the reason why we sit in anger, grow anger, rest in anger, almost like thrive in anger, is because it makes us feel alive in negative energy, in unwholesome energy. And when we have all these people supporting us, maybe we join a group on social media, then we feel, oh, we belong, we're accepted for these views and opinions, even though they're unwholesome. And so it's really seeing that for what that is, that we're thriving on something quite unwholesome, and it just grows anger and resentment. And so you see on social media some of these groups really catapulting in membership. They went from a few hundred members to thousands to 100,000, and in some cases millions. And this could be people against mask wearing. This could be people against certain political groups and theories. This could be against the loss of freedoms. This could be against 5G. It could be against so many different things. But the problem is that anger doesn't decrease when we join these groups, when we talk over these things, when we play the blame game. And a lot of the family disharmony at the moment arises, because of these particular issues. When people differ on views, And we're not judging whether some are sane or insane. We're just saying when people differ on views, there is massive divisiveness and massive discord in families. And so some people no longer want to speak to each other because of this. And more anger arises because of that. And so it's an ever increasing pillar of anger. And it's a time of extreme unhappiness at the moment. You know, the world is abiding in a lot of deep anger, deep hatred, and what's simmering is rage. And so what we can do when we look at this Buddhist perspective of anger during lockdown is to really use this real life situation to pull it apart. And what we've come to realize is that there are many layers of anger, you know, because the root of it is dosa, you know, this hatred. And so when we look at anger 1.0, we're just looking at this real life situation. But when we look at it further, when we peel further layers, what we'll see is that at a deeper level, one of our greatest angers comes from having birthed this body. And for some it may be difficult to understand because they don't understand the Buddhist context, the Buddhist teachings. But at the heart of it is, some of us, when we realize that we made yet another mistake, here we are again, you know, through many, many lifetimes of samsara, you realize that you made the wrong choice again, that you didn't heed the Buddhist teachings. And so here you are again, having to experience all this dukkha. Anger is one manifestation of dukkha. You know, it causes deep unhappiness. But at the root of it is not all these different things. I mean, yes, this situation that we're going through at the moment is really what the Buddha would call jatipi dukkha. Birth is dukkha. When we birth this body, we have to go through all these conditions that arise in the world. We are all party to past karma that is arising right now in the world. And whatever we do from here contributes to karma that will ripen in the future. And what does the Buddha say about being born? When we birth, we are subject to old age, sickness and death. Now, hands up anybody that doesn't get angry as we grow old, or as we see our loved ones get old. No, we all get angry actually. If we are quite honest in how we feel when we look in the mirror, when we go from, 20 to 30 to 40 to 50, there is a deep sadness and sorrow that comes with that. And underlying to that is anger, that we no longer look the way that we used to look, that we no longer can operate the body the way it used to. It doesn't spring back as quickly as before. Same with our loved ones. We get extremely sad and sorrowful as they age, as they get sick. We don't even like getting sick ourselves, even during this current period. And then of course death. We meet death time and time again. We cannot avoid that, and that makes us angry. And so that's just giving you a little bit of a taste for the layers of anger. So we're not going to go deeper than that for this session. It might be anger 2.0, 3.0, 4.0. It's later down the track. So looking at anger and resentment, this is where we stand when we look at it just off the bat in terms of the current lockdown restriction scenario. But now what we want to look at is what the Buddha has to say about it. One of the things that we can look at before launching into the Āghātavatthu Sutta, the teaching of the Buddha, is to look at some of these other Buddha's words, because the clear message that the Buddha gives that must be emphasized is that one doesn't overcome anger with anger. So in the Sallekha Sutta, which is in Majjhima Nikaya, discourse number 8, the Buddha says, "Others will be angry, we shall not be angry here. Effacement should be practiced thus." And likewise, he goes on to say, "Others will be resentful, we shall not be resentful here. Effacement should be practiced thus." So the practice of the spiritual path, the Buddha's Noble Eightfold Path, is very much by not being angry, one overcomes anger. And this is reinforced in another sutta, which is the Potaliya Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya as well, and it's discourse number 54. The Buddha says, with the support of no anger and irritation are to be abandoned, so it was said. So again, very much the emphasis is it's out of not being angry, like having no supports for anger and irritation, anger and resentment, that is how anger is abandoned. And so when you think about joining social groups, developing all kinds of reasons for anger and resentment, and then going ahead and basically pursuing anger through anger, then nothing good comes of it. And it's important to actually contemplate these very things that the Buddha is encouraging us. Don't almost like fight anger with anger. Don't think that you'll abandon anger with more anger. And so this is the Buddha's words. In the Āghātavatthu Sutta, which is in Anguttara Nikaya, chapter 10, discourse number 79, the Buddha gives 10 different grounds for anger. There are similar suttas. There's one in chapter 5 of the Anguttara Nikaya, and there's also one in chapter 9 of the Anguttara Nikaya. They have some of these 10 reasons or 10 grounds for anger. Now, in this particular case, it has all 10, which is, it begins with thinking, they have harmed me. The second is, they are harming me. And the third is, they will harm me. Then the fourth is, they have harmed someone pleasing and agreeable to me. The fifth is, they are harming someone pleasing and agreeable to me. The sixth is, they will harm someone pleasing and agreeable to me. So these are all the people that are our loved ones, people that we care about. Then the seventh is, they have helped someone displeasing and disagreeable to me. The eighth is, they are helping someone displeasing and disagreeable to me. And the ninth is, they will help someone displeasing and disagreeable to me. And so in these three cases, it's basically they're helping someone you don't like, or someone that is an enemy to you. And the final one, the 10th, is you get angry for no reason. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to look at how we can deconstruct these 10 grounds for anger. And we're going to look at it through the lens of the lockdown and restrictions as our working example. Essentially what we're trying to do is deconstruct these grounds for anger that the Buddha talks about. And it's good to put the Buddha's words into a diagram or a picture in order for us to be able to deconstruct, to help us to look at it as different sets of information. And so when you take the Buddha's words from the Āghātavatthu Sutta, you get a diagram like this. And what it is, it's a grouping of things. So you will have noticed that there are 3 areas that the Buddha talks about. So it's when the grounds are associated with oneself, so the harm is happening to oneself. The other way that is a reason for anger is if the harm is happening to people that you care about, people that are loved ones, so people that you like or find agreeable. And then the other way of looking at it is they're helping your enemies or people that you dislike, the opposition. So those are the 3 kinds of categories that, 9 of the grounds fall into. And of course, then you get angry for no reason. And then the other category or the categorization that it falls into, if you will have noticed, is that there are ones that are associated with the past, there are grounds that are associated with the current, present situation, and then there are grounds that are associated with the future. So in reference to, the lockdown and restrictions, what we say is, whoever we are blaming, they have harmed me in the past. So last year, they put me into lockdown and restrictions. They made those decisions. In the present, they are still harming me right now. And then in the future, you think, well, they will harm me in the future, and therefore there are things that I want to do. And out of the justification from the past and right now, you can justify that all the way into the future. And the same goes with people that you care about. They have harmed them in the past, they are harming them now, and they will do so in the future. And the same with, helping people that you dislike or you think is the opposition. They're helping, someone that I don't like. They've done that in the past, they're doing it now, and they'll do it in the future. And when you look at it in this way, it's actually, you think, oh my goodness, how can this be true? And so what you see is there's a level of permanency, what Buddha calls niccca. There's a level of permanency that we're assigning. That when we go from past, like the stories that we hold on to about the past wrongdoings, the past harm that people have caused to me and my loved ones, or the help that they've given to people I dislike or the opposition, then permanency makes it more real. It makes it more justified that these people will continue to harm me now, and they will definitely harm me in the future. And we don't know whether that's actually true, but because of our very strong views around this, the assignation of blame, how we assign blame, permanency arises, and we're adamant about it. And so this is where the justification comes from. How we were talking about the blame game and then wanting to feel righteous about our position in anger. It comes from this permanency that we're assigning. So just because someone has harmed me in the past, and just because they're harming me now, that we link that, doesn't mean they're going to harm us in the future. But we adamantly believe it is true. And so we really need to investigate that. So oftentimes we're thinking, oh, the government has harmed me in the past. They're the ones that made all these rules. They're the ones that put us into lockdown. Therefore, during this time, if we're still in lockdown right now, we're saying they're harming me now. They're still restricting my freedom. They're still doing these things. And so our greatest fear, and where anger is coming from, is that they're going to continue to do this. What's in store for us in the future? And so that's why we join certain groups, looking for support, looking for justification, looking for some bit of happiness that says if we protest, if we do certain things, if we call them out, if we vote in a different way, we won't be disappointed, we won't have this in the future. But the thing is, we can't actually work on those things in ourselves very well internally if we keep thinking that it's all out there. And one of the things that we need to do in order to deconstruct anger is to actually look at what's happening inside our minds. How are we thinking? And that's not to diminish any of the things that people are doing externally to try and improve external conditions. There's a place for that. But one of the problems with external dealings is that one tends to abide in these defilements. And anger is very much a defilement. One of the things about defilements is that it energizes us on negative energy, on unwholesome energy. So it feels like you're doing really good things, but you breed a lot of defilements in order to get things done. And that can be from housework all the way to massive protests. So internally, it's very important to actually address these, because that's all we can really do. If we're under lockdown, the best thing we can do is actually to understand what's happening inside our minds and actually to purify our minds. Because in order to see very clearly what the Buddha says as seeing things as they really are, we need clean minds. When the mind is very dirty, stained with defilements, overcome with emotions, backed up with lots of stories from the past, we can't help ourselves. And by looking at this particular diagram for the grounds for anger, we can see if we're caught up in the past, we're continually blaming people based on past actions, we ourselves can't get out of the mud, out of the quicksand that is anger. What do? We sink right into anger, can't get out of it. So really investigate this permanency we assigned. Because we say out of this permanency, they are always like that. This is always the way it's going to be. They are always in the wrong. And we need to really pull apart whether there is truth in this. And this is where mental defilements really almost like sabotage us. And this sense of permanency really sabotages us, because we enter into the realm of cruelty. Whether it is true or not about politicians, medical professionals, conspiracy theorists, controlled opposition, our family members, all the different people that we assign blame to. Whether it's true or not, we can be also quite cruel in our minds towards them. We can harm them in our minds by just almost like painting them with a brush that means they're always like that, because it's not true. People change all the time. People's views go up and down all the time. Look at our own views. They oscillate all the time depending on the type of company we keep. If we keep good company, as defined by the Buddha, people that are erring on the side of wholesome, walking the Noble Eightfold Path, not wanting to cultivate defilements, wanting to abandon them, wanting to have more wholesome speech, more wholesome action, coming from a place of non-ill will, non-grudging, non-harming, then these kinds of people don't encourage you to fester, abide in anger and make it worse, grow the anger and resentment, get rageful. Whereas when you're keeping company with people that want you to remain in anger, because that's where, people can come together in a wholesome way, then they're not helping you. Anger tends to deepen. One almost gets to deep despair. So if you're restricted at home and you're logging into groups and you feel like you belong, but at the end of the day when you turn off and you're by yourself at home, how alone do you feel with your negative mind states? It's pretty awful. It leads to massive depression and wanting to self-harm. That's where it ends up in. And so when we really look at this, it's very important to not join groups that are causing more harm to oneself and to others. To actually see that we want to be around people that are in the more wholesome mind states, because they lift us up. That's why spiritual people, particularly people that are understanding the Buddha's words, particularly the Noble Eightfold Path, these are people that are drawing you to wisdom, to greater virtue, being able to concentrate the mind and make it happy, temporarily happy, but still happy. Long-lasting happiness is really nibbana, enlightenment, real awakening, true awakening. But at least you're leaning in that direction when you associate with good people. And of course, wisdom arises. And so this is what the Buddha talks about when Buddha talks about the Āghātavatthu Sutta, is to really look at where we're assigning blame. What are our grounds for anger? And are we growing them? And so when you take the real life situation of lockdowns, restrictions, loss of freedom, authoritarian regimes at the moment, then use it as a way of investigating these grounds for anger and looking at where we go wrong with it, assigning permanency. We actually bring up a lot of lies. We don't think so, but to make this whole thing cobbled together to remain as permanent, we lie to ourselves. So if we take family members at the moment with differing views from our own, quite often because of a fight or a dispute, we say, oh, they're not on our side, they're harming me. They're saying, words to me in anger, and we might say words back to them. And so in the present, we're still holding on to that grudge, and we're still saying that they're harming me, and we expect them to harm us in the future. But what we do is, at that point, we start grudging on them. And so that's the reason why we can't have calm conversations with them. And that might also be colleagues, it might be even our children. It might be even towards our parents. And the category that comes up of we get angry for no reason is when there's so much delusion about the current situation that we've gone through the other 9 categories and we end up in this place where anything can trigger anger. You know, even if someone looks at us in the wrong way in the house or outside, we might just get angry. We know nothing about that person, but it just triggers anger. And so it's almost like we're on a little right on the edge. And that's when you know things are really, really bad. That it's really important to really look at this, because we don't want to have this very, very almost like trigger that can happen at any moment, and then we can hurt people with our words, with our actions, get into physical fights over things that are so trivial. And that's the thing right now. We're on a hair trigger that it just takes one small thing in the household for a huge argument to arise. In normal situations, this wouldn't be the case. Think about it. Back up, a few years ago, and would person just looking at you make you angry? In most cases, not. But those who are deeply abiding with anger as a way to survive, and it may sound kind of silly, but there are people surviving purely on anger, then this one little thing can trigger. And so this is the way that we can look at it. This is what the Buddha means in this Āghātavatthu Sutta, that you go through these different steps, and it may be towards ourselves or it may be towards people that we love. And in most cases, if people are harming our loved ones, people are harming people that we care about, we feel even more justified to act to overcome whoever is harming this person, and the grudge remains even stronger. So you think about if someone is harming our parents, like if we have certain views about vaccines, if we have certain views about social distancing, then of course we're going to be very, very active in our anger and aggression, our resentment around that. How dare you? These are the words that come up with anger. How dare you? Who do you think you are? And becomes very righteously indignant. And so we feel compelled in our anger and justified in our anger. And then when we see someone helping people that we don't like, we get even more irate, even more clenched. And many of us get very sick from anger. And so this is more of a reason not to hold on to it. Instead, deconstruct it. Look at the stories that we use to justify. Look at the permanency that when we believe the past, that we put the line in the sand and say, that is so true what happened in the past. That person is so wrong. But have we put ourselves in that person's shoes? Do we understand everything about where that person was coming from? Do we understand how mixed it is when it comes to governments and organizations? How difficult it is to juggle all the requirements? And then in the present, just really looking at that. Do we look at it with fresh eyes, what's happening in the present? Or do we cobble it all together and look at it? And is there anything we can be grateful for that's happened during this time? From past to present. And how do we really know that what's happening right now is going to continue in the future? Most of us make these sweeping statements, oh yes, this is definitely going to carry on for the next couple of years. But seriously, how do we really know that? Or all kinds of things, around elections, around government, around people in our family. How do we know any of these things are going to be true? And so it's really to question it as part of deconstructing. We started to look at some of the mental defilements when we looked at the Āghātavatthu Sutta. And so the very good teaching that the Buddha gives, which is the simile of the cloth, the Āghātavatthu Sutta, is something that we have already talked about. And for those that don't remember, the Āghātavatthu Sutta is the Buddha teaching of the simile of the cloth, and he uses the simile of an unclean cloth and a clean cloth to talk about when you dye the cloth, what actually happens. So with the unclean cloth, the one with stains, when you dye it, the dye job comes out poorly. And the Buddha likens that to the mind that is defiled, that it has a lot of mental defilements and stains, that when you try to concentrate it, it's very difficult to make the mind happy because it has all these defilements, it hasn't been purified. Whereas if you start with a clean cloth and you try to dye it, then you almost get a perfect or pristine dye job at the end. Likewise with the mind, if you start with a clean mind and you meditate, and what happens is happiness arises more easily, and then you're able to concentrate more easily. And so in the same way, what we're trying to see with this is that in the last sutta we were talking about permanency, and we were talking about how we lie to ourselves and cause great harm, by abiding in anger, out of playing the blame game, assigning permanency to people and to situations, and how we never get out of anger or resentment. And when we can see, we can break through that there is no permanency, that we're actually lying to ourselves, then we can deconstruct the anger. And so in looking at the Āghātavatthu Sutta, what we're trying to do is deconstruct mental defilements. So we know that there is also ill will. Ill will is like wishing bad on a person. We have no goodwill, we have ill will towards a person. And so that escalates to anger. So we can see this on this pictorial, that we start with anger. When we keep assigning permanency to people in particular, so we're angry with a person, during this lockdown we're angry with certain people. What happens is when we don't abandon anger, it escalates to hostility. We're grudging on them, we're name calling them, and we assume that what they've done in the past will hold true for the present and into the future. And so in the same way, with this escalation, hostility arises. So when hostility arises and we don't abandon that, divisiveness arises. And with divisiveness, we're now separating out, we like this person, we don't like this person. This person is on our side, this person is against us. And so when we look for people to support us in our endeavors, out of anger and hostility, what we're saying here is, to our friends, to various family members, to various groups, hey, this person has these bad qualities, they're really bad, they have these views and opinions about lockdown, and so we should shun them. And so we are bringing people onto our side with those views and opinions. And so this quality of palasa, divisiveness, in our minds we are dividing, and that's where divide and conquer comes from. This very worldly thing of divide and conquer, when we're in arguments, where we're about to go to protests, when we're about to go to war, divide and conquer is where this divisiveness comes from. So then when we don't abandon divisiveness, stinginess arises, macharya. Stinginess is also called selfishness. And if you remember, there's 5 different kinds of stinginess or selfishness. There is stinginess due to gain. There is stinginess due to our abode. There is stinginess due to reputation. There is stinginess due to our families or clans or groups. And there is stinginess due to our dhamma, our ideas, our knowledge. And so when you think about arguments such as what's happening in lockdown, well, any ideas and views that we have, such as Dhammamacharya, that's where we continue to divide. So we've put ourselves into particular categories. This person believes in masks, this person don't believe in masks. This person believes in vaccine, this person doesn't believe in vaccine. This person sides with communism, this person sides with democracy. This person sides with the science, this person doesn't side with the science. They don't believe in viruses. This person sides with QAnon. This person doesn't side with QAnon. This person believes in the United Nations and the work that they're doing. This person doesn't believe in the United Nations and the work that they're doing. This person believes in, China. This person doesn't believe in China. So on and so forth. And so then you see the kulamacharya, the stinginess depending on which side you sit on in that group. And so you see different forms of stinginess arise, alongside those 5 that are categorized by the Buddha. So you get the gist of where this is going. And then you get to Sata, which is deception. This is where we lie. We lie because we don't know. Like all those things that we just went through, the honest truth about all of it is that we don't really know. Like when you go from past to present to future, in the past, a lot of what we rely on is we think that what we know about the past is true. And what Buddha says is that everything in samsara is actually quite deceptive. Musa mosa dhamma. That there is a deception in what we believe to be true, but we're so adamant about it, even around science, even around what we think of the government, even what we think about everything to do with our views and opinions. But it's like a leaky bucket. We can never be sure whether we are actually in the right, that we know for sure. And so Buddha asks us to really investigate that, to really pull that apart, really crack it open. And it can be quite hard to do because if we have very deep-seated anger based on very deep-seated views and ideals, then we can't see the deception that we're doing to ourselves. Because there's not a lot that we can do about what's happening outside of ourselves, but we can really look at it within. And this is part of looking at the Āghātavatthu Sutta. As we've said before, the Āghātavatthu Sutta is a very deep sutta. People think it's simply about, these mental defilements and then you just move on from it. But the deeper you go with the Āghātavatthu Sutta, this simile of the cloth, you actually see that a lot of how we get things wrong are embedded in mental defilements, that the sense of who we are is embedded in mental defilements. The sense of permanency is embedded in the Āghātavatthu Sutta, these mental defilements. So a lot of the lies that we tell are based on lies from the past, and we bring them into the present. We use our stories, our perceptions, even our emotions and feelings to back up what happened in the past, to justify how we feel about what's happening right now. And then you can imagine when you have this kind of wrong view, you take that into the future. You say, this is going to happen. This is going to happen. Yeah. And even if it does happen, what we're also not seeing is karma. There is a law of cause and effect that we are all party to. And yes, we are the owners of our own karma, but we are also party to what's happening in the world. And so we are born into this present existence based on that. And we lie to ourselves about it. So there's something a lot deeper in how we should be looking at things and how we can use the Buddha's teaching on this. So what does the Buddha say about the Āghātavatthu Sutta at its very core? The Buddha says we need to investigate using our examples how we cause these things to arise and how we cause them not to arise and to abandon them. So in the case of mental defilements, the Buddha is always saying, don't just observe them. Don't allow them to be there. Don't think that they're just going to pass away. You need to do something about it. And by understanding the Buddha's teaching on these things, this is the way we can abandon them. Because it's only by knowing how we cause them to arise such as playing the blame game, looking at these different grounds of resentment, how we lie to ourselves, how we can be quite cruel to others based on this permanency we assign, how we hold grudges. So when you look at this example, say we're having a dispute with a family member over, masks and vaccines. Well, we get very angry if we take one position and they take another, and we don't let go of that. Then we have hostility to that particular family member. We go, I don't agree with you. You don't know what you're talking about. You're an idiot. So we start name calling. This is hostility. And then what we do is we talk to other family members and say, hey, this person is an idiot. They don't know what they're talking about. They do or don't trust the science, depending on which side of the fence we sit on. And then there's massive divisiveness that we end up bullying each other. They end up bullying us with their group in the family, and we end up bullying them with our group in the family. There's massive discord. And we are in stinginess because I'm right, you're wrong. There's mental rigidity in there as well. I'm right, you're wrong. And the deception is that, well, if you really investigate from Dhamma, there is no right or wrong in this. There is just a situation that is very tenuous, and we're hurting each other. And Buddha would say, Musa Mosa Dhamma, this is lies, you're being deceived. This is extremely unwholesome. And Buddha would say, how much are we suffering in cultivating these kinds of situations ourselves, and in having such poor, virtue, but through body, speech and mind towards others. How we don't see ourselves in the same predicament with each other. We are all in the lockdown and restrictions, but we're still fighting over, things that are really not that important in the grand scheme of things. In the grand scheme of things, this is where the Buddha asks us to look at what is our ultimate predicament. The ultimate predicament is we are born, we are subject to birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, sickness is dukkha, death is dukkha. And if we don't see through these types of things, including clinging to the five aggregates is dukkha, then we experience the whole mass of suffering, which is sadness, sorrow, pain, grief, despair, separation from what is liked, union with what is disliked. We never get what we want. And isn't this the case with the lockdown? We're not getting what we want. We're separated from everything that we like, which is from the people that we care about, our loved ones, all the way to our freedoms. We're united with being isolated from our loved ones, isolated from our freedoms, isolated from being able to do what we like. And so, in many ways, this is what samsara is like. We're met with aging, we're met with sickness. This whole time period is about sickness, fearing sickness, worrying about sickness, being sick. Not just sick in the sense of the sickness that is pervading our time, but the sickness of the mind, mental defilements. That's what is increasing in the world. All these mental defilements, all 16 of the Āghātavatthu Sutta mental defilements. So what we can do is actually turn the tide of these mental defilements, really seek to abandon them. Know that, with this particular link, there are many links in the Āghātavatthu Sutta. This is just one of them that shows you how you get to such an unwholesome place. And if you don't see it, and you don't see the downfall, the danger of that, what does the Buddha say? If you keep cultivating unwholesome and have unwholesome virtue or no virtue, you have the wrong view. What does the Buddha say? The Buddha says that one ends up at the end of life, you've accrued all this unwholesome karma, you've hurt so many people, harmed yourself. Where do you end up? You end up in a lower realm, coming back into animal realm, hell realm, hungry ghost realm. So the ramifications are quite large. But you don't even have to think of it in those terms. You can even think about it in this very life right now. Where do you end up when you have an angry mind? You're hurt, you're upset, you're constantly abiding in anger. Your mind is whirling, looping in anger, and nobody likes to be around you. So you think about, do you like to be around angry people? Well, some of you might say yes. But most of the time, most of us would say no, because to be on the receiving end of anger is actually quite horrible. And when you understand that, then you know, what is it like for other people to be around you when you're angry? It's absolutely horrible. It's the same thing. Friendships break over anger. Family relationships break over anger. Colleagues, work environments, all kinds of environments that we find ourselves in, they break due to anger. And so it's not to be lauded, it's actually something that we need to abandon. To round off this session, it's good to look at, this giving up of anger and resentment, where this leads to. And if we come back to some of our opening comments about anger and resentment and how we play certain games, we can understand giving up through the same kind of points. So in terms of the blame game, you recognize you no longer want to play this blame game, that having enemies in our mind, having external enemies, it's extremely unwholesome. That's the first thing. But it actually just plays into the hands of increasing our anger, not being able to climb out of the sewer of anger. And so when you really start to penetrate some of these amazing teachings of the Buddha, helping us to understand the root of anger, the root of hatred, then you realize, actually, I don't want to play this game anymore. I don't want to do this. I don't want to make contact with people that are going to encourage me in this direction. I don't want to belong to groups that are just increasing anger or helping me to abide in anger. That I have a choice in all of this. It's quite empowering when you recognize that, realize that. It's a very empowering thing. You take back control and you put security measures in place to guard the mind. So you can't just simply fling it all away. It takes time. It's a gradual process. But the more you see around it, the more you guard your mind from the news, from certain topics of discussion, because once you talk about these things, verbalize them, you go down the slippery slope. And so often it's almost like you give yourself the thought in your mind, it's like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, and if I'm not careful, I'm going to tumble over. So every conversation during this time, during lockdown and restrictions, you're actually more cautious about what you talk about and to whom you talk about. Careful about what you type into groups on WhatsApp, social media, Facebook groups, because it has a ripple effect. So you want to be more cautious, and then you don't want to assign blame. And then one of the wholesome qualities that comes up is actually shame, moral shame. That when you start to understand, or you do understand the teachings of the Buddha, this healthy type of shame comes up. It's the one that prevents you from doing wrong. It's called hiri, and the other part to hiri is fear, āghātavatthu. So hiri and āghātavatthu, moral shame and moral dread, like fear of wrongdoing, they're two very wholesome qualities that the Buddha talks about, that when you're on the path, they help to prevent you from going down the path of unwholesome. So abiding, generating, causing to arise anger and resentment, and to cultivate, the opposite of that, so the wholesome qualities. And so you might find that over time these tend to kick in more quick, or they actually kick in and stay there, so they prevent you, and that's a very good thing. So sometimes you either, in the beginning, you just feel silly for justifying your anger. The minute you say it out, you think, oh, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't justify and rationalize, be logical about this anger. And at other times, you just feel shameful. You regret getting angry. And that's a very good thing when you regret anger and you come back from it. you apologize, you forgive. You forgive someone else's anger. That's also something that's really important. It means that you're transcending certain aspects about anger. And then, one of the things that the Buddha says is that we are all the owners and heirs of our karma. So when you know it's unwholesome, it has unwholesome results in this lifetime or in future lifetimes. And also when someone is angry with you, you can actually look at someone and say, you are the owner of your karma, in your mind even. And then you know that you don't actually have to do anything more because this person is the owner of their karma. You don't wish them ill, but unfortunately, you might not be able to help them and they're angry, but you know that you don't actually need to do more because they're already going to suffer. They're already going to be the owners and the heirs of whatever they're doing right now. And you can forgive them. You can feel some kind of compassion towards that person because this is the predicament that we're in. We are all the owners and heirs of our karma. So if we choose consciously and unconsciously, but particularly consciously, to do wrong things through body, speech and mind, have to remember we're the owners and heirs of that. And then the other part of that is we develop more wholesome qualities to become good people as defined by the Buddha, sappurusas. We no longer want to pull people into our anger because we see it as unwholesome. We see that as dragging people into unwholesome things. And Buddha doesn't recommend that. It's just like, when we share Dhamma, we want to share wholesome Dhamma, the true Dhamma, Sadhamma. There's always a risk that when we share something other than the Buddha's teachings, that we lead people down the wrong path, the wrong practice. And if we do so, we bear the repercussions of that. And so that's why we need to be very careful. And so the good thing about giving up anger and resentment is we no longer want to pull people into the wrong things. We no longer want them to, cause anger to arise. And we no longer want to help them to increase anger either. And rather than thriving on unwholesome or negative energy, we start to thrive on joy, peace, calm, wholesome energy. And it's good to notice that when you meditate on the Āghātavatthu Sutta, the abandoning of defilements, the mind gets very happy. It gets very calm. It gets very one-pointed, unified in goodness. And there's such a stark contrast between that kind of mind state versus the one that is angry, resentful, hostile, and deeply imbued in all the defilements. There's such a stark contrast. It's night and day, darkness and lightness. And then when you really understand the predicament that we're all in, that's where the joy or the peace comes from. The peace, the calm comes from wanting others to do better, wanting others to come out of this predicament that we're all in. Birth, aging, sickness, death, not getting what we want, coming back to the whole mass of suffering. We're all in the same boat in that respect. There's an equalization when we actually can see the larger predicament. How can we wish ill on people when we understand that we're all in the same boat? That this predicament is far greater in dukkha than just the anger that we can harness. And so wholesome energy is where we get to. It's actually around joy, around peace, around mental happiness, all the opposites of anger, resentment. So this is our session on anger 1.0. So we can end the session here and we can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Blessings of the Triple Gem to all of you. Whatever circumstances you find yourself around the world, whether it's in lockdown or restrictions, may you be free from anger and resentment and all the grounds for anger and resentment. Wishing you all well. Teruvan Saranai.